Carla Walker vanished on a quiet summer night. But Evan Hargreave lived freely for 46 years until Detective Miles Corbett's case file was reopened, and a single piece of forgotten evidence finally brought the police to his door. Carla Walker was 19 years old when her life quietly slipped into darkness on a warm summer night in 1979. The evening began, like many others in her small town, where nothing ever seemed to change, and everyone recognized familiar faces. Carla had spent the day working a short shift and later stopped at a modest roadside diner just outside town limits. It was the kind of place people visited without thinking. A stop between destinations, lit by flickering lights and surrounded by empty stretches of road. No one noticed anything unusual about her that night. She appeared calm, unhurried, and completely unaware that she was being watched. When Carla left the diner, the parking lot was nearly empty. The sun had already disappeared, leaving behind a humid darkness that clung to the air. Her car pulled onto the road and vanished into the quiet streets leading toward home. That was the last confirmed sighting of her alive. By midnight, concern began to grow when she failed to return. Carla was reliable and careful, never staying out late without explanation. Her absence felt wrong immediately, like something had snapped out of place. By early morning, fear took over. Family members contacted the police, and a search began before daylight fully broke. Hours later, Carla's car was discovered near a narrow service road bordered by overgrown brush. The scene was unsettling. The driver's door stood open, the keys were missing, and her purse sat untouched on the passenger seat. Nothing appeared stolen. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken glass, and no visible blood. It looked as if Carla had simply stepped out and vanished into the dark. As investigators secured the area, the silence felt heavy. The location suggested intention rather than chaos. Whoever took Carla had chosen a place where no one would hear or see anything. Tire tracks near the road hinted that another vehicle may have been present, but rain from earlier that night had washed away anything useful. Every detail raised more questions than answers. The town awoke to spreading rumors and growing panic. Parents kept their children indoors. Store owners closed early. The sense of safety people once took for granted evaporated overnight. Search teams expanded into nearby fields, woods, and drainage areas. Flyers bearing Carla's face appeared on poles and shop windows. Volunteers combed areas that seemed endless, driven by hope rather than logic. 3 days later, hope collapsed. Carla's body was found in a dry creek bed, miles away from where her car had been abandoned. The location was isolated, difficult to reach, and clearly chosen to delay discovery. The scene revealed disturbing signs of control and planning. This was not a crime of sudden rage. Investigators immediately understood that they were dealing with someone methodical, patient, and dangerously calm. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community. News crews arrived, broadcasting the story far beyond town borders. Carla's name became a headline, then a warning. The idea that someone capable of such violence had walked unnoticed among them was terrifying. People began locking doors during the day. Trust between neighbors quietly eroded. For detectives, the pressure was immense. Every hour mattered, yet every lead felt thin. The killer had left almost nothing behind. No witnesses came forward. No clear motive surfaced. The evidence seemed to point everywhere and nowhere at once. That night, in 1979, marked the beginning of a mystery that would haunt the town for decades. Carla Walker became more than a victim. She became a symbol of innocence, stolen, and fear unleashed. And while her life ended in silence, the questions surrounding her disappearance would refuse to fade, waiting patiently for a future that no one yet imagined. In the months following Carla Walker's murder, the investigation consumed everything it touched. Detective Miles Corbett spent countless nights reviewing reports, maps, and timelines, searching for a pattern that refused to appear. The crime showed intelligence and restraint, suggesting the killer was someone who understood how investigations worked or had learned quickly from experience. Yet no similar cases surfaced nearby, leaving detectives unsure whether they were hunting a local predator or someone passing through. Hundreds of tips flooded in. Some came from frightened residents pointing fingers at neighbors, co-workers, or former partners. Others were vague sightings of suspicious vehicles or unfamiliar faces. Each lead was followed, documented, and ultimately discarded. Interviews dragged on for hours, but nothing solid ever formed. The case seemed to dissolve every time. Investigators believed they were getting close. The lack of physical evidence became the greatest obstacle. No usable fingerprints could be recovered. No reliable witnesses placed Carla with anyone after she left the diner. Forensic methods of the time offered little help, and evidence that might later become critical was either misunderstood or considered insignificant. The killer had been careful, leaving behind only confusion. As weeks turned into months, Public attention slowly drifted away. New crimes made headlines, and the town attempted to return to normal. But beneath the surface, fear lingered. Parents still warned their children. Women avoided being alone after dark. The unspoken question remained. If the killer was never caught, could he still be there? Unknown to investigators, the answer was yes. Evan Hargreave continued his life. Without interruption, he lived less than 15 miles from where Carla disappeared, close enough to hear the rumors and read the headlines. He followed the case closely, absorbing every detail reported in the newspapers. Each article confirmed. Weddiard believed that he had planned well and left nothing behind. He changed nothing about his routine. He went to work, attended social gatherings, and maintained an image of reliability. People described him as quiet but friendly, someone who kept to himself. There was nothing about him that raised suspicion. That was his greatest protection. Years passed, and the investigation slowly lost momentum. Detective Corbett refused to let go. Even after supervisors encouraged him to focus on newer cases, he continued revisiting Carla's file. He drove the same roads, stood in the same places, and asked the same questions, hoping time might loosen someone's memory. It never did. Eventually, the case was labeled cold. Evidence was boxed and stored. Leads were exhausted. The system moved on, but the failure weighed heavily on those who had tried to solve it. Corbett retired with Carla's file still fresh in his mind, convinced the killer had been hiding in plain sight all along. Meanwhile, Evan's life progressed in ways no one questioned. He married, started a family, and became a familiar face. In the community, he watched as Carla's name faded from conversations, replaced by new tragedies and distractions. The fear he once caused transformed into a distant memory, but the crime had not disappeared. It waited quietly, preserved in files and fragments of evidence. While technology advanced and time marched forward, the truth remained buried, locked. Inside a past that seemed unreachable, the killer believed he had one. Decades of silence convinced him the case would never be reopened. He aged without consequence, carrying a secret that no one suspected. Yet, unknown to him, time was not an ally. It was a slow, patient force preparing to undo everything he thought he had escaped. The disappearance of justice did not mean it was gone forever. It was only waiting for the right moment to return. Decades after Carla Walker's murder slipped into history, a quiet decision changed everything. A newly formed cold case unit began reviewing unsolved crimes that had been buried by time. The goal was simple but ambitious: re-examine old evidence. Using modern science, Carla's file, thick with notes and unanswered questions, was pulled from storage and placed back under the light. Boxers that had not been opened in years were carefully unpacked. Every item was cataloged again, no matter how insignificant it once seemed. Photographs were scanned, reports were digitized, and preserved materials were sent for fresh analysis. What had once been dismissed as unusable was now treated as a potential key. Jonah Keene, a forensic analyst known for patience and precision, focused on one small piece of preserved evidence collected from the recovery site. At the time, it had offered no clear value. Now, with advanced techniques, it carried possibility. Jonah worked methodically, aware that a single mistake could erase a fragile chance at truth. The process took weeks. Tests were repeated. Results were verified. Slowly, a partial genetic profile began to emerge. It was incomplete, but it was real. That alone was something investigators in 1979 could never have imagined. The profile was entered into a national database, not with certainty, but with hope. Days passed with no response, then weeks. The team prepared themselves for disappointment. Cold cases often raised expectations, only to crush them. But one morning, the system flagged a connection. It was not a direct hit, but a familial link. Someone related to the unknown suspect had submitted genetic information for an entirely different reason. The name attached to the match did not belong to a criminal. It belonged to an ordinary man with no record and no known connection to Carla Walker. That made it more unsettling. Investigators traced family trees, public records, and old addresses, narrowing the list with careful restraint. Every step required accuracy. A mistake could cost everything. As the search tightened, one name surfaced repeatedly: Evan Hargreave. He lived close to the original crime scene. His age matched the profile. His movements during the time of the murder could not be clearly accounted for. None of this proved guilt, but together, it demanded attention. Investigators began quietly rebuilding his past, piece by piece. They learned about his steady employment, his long marriage, and his clean reputation. There were no arrests, no accusations, no rumors worth noting. To everyone around him, Evan was dependable and predictable. That only deepened the mystery. The most dangerous secrets often hide behind ordinary lives. Surveillance began carefully. Without alerting him, officers observed routines that had not changed in years. Evan's life moved in patterns, calm and controlled. There were no signs of fear or suspicion. He behaved like a man who believed the past was sealed. Behind the scenes, investigators worked to legally obtain a direct sample for comparison. The process was slow and deliberate. When the final test was run, there was no uncertainty. The match was exact. 40-6 years of questions suddenly collapsed into a single answer. The room where the results were confirmed fell silent. The weight of what they held was overwhelming. Carla Walker was no longer just a case number or a faded photograph. Hercula had a name, an address, and a life he never should have been allowed to keep. Justice, long thought impossible, was now within reach. The truth had survived time, neglect, and silence. And for the first time since 1979, the past was ready to confront the present. The decision to move forward came quietly but carried enormous weight. Investigators understood that one mistake could unravel years of careful work. Every document was reviewed, every test rechecked, and every procedure verified. When approval was finally granted, there was no celebration, only focus. The moment they had waited decades for had arrived. Evan Hargreave remained unaware that his carefully constructed life was about to collapse. His days followed the same predictable rhythm he had relied on for years. He believed the past had been buried too deeply to ever return. The crime existed only as a distant memory, one, he assumed, belonged to another era. Disconnected from the present, officers approached his home on a quiet afternoon chosen deliberately to avoid attention. Patrol cars lined the street with controlled precision, their presence subtle but unmistakable. Neighbors paused, sensing that something serious was unfolding. Evan opened his door, expecting nothing more than another ordinary interruption. Within moments, the truth surfaced. As the reality of the situation became clear, his calm exterior fractured. The confidence built over decades drained from his face. Years of silence, secrecy, and certainty dissolved under the weight of evidence he could not escape. The expression he wore was not confusion, but recognition. He understood exactly why the police were there. Inside the home, officers moved carefully, documenting everything. Ordinary objects suddenly carried a disturbing contrast. Symbols of a normal life lived alongside a hidden crime. Photographs on the walls showed milestones he never should have reached without consequence. The quiet house felt heavy, as if the past had finally stepped inside. News of the arrest spread quickly. Reporters gathered, and the town that once feared an unknown killer now faced a far more unsettling truth. The man accused of Carla Walker's murder was not a stranger. He was someone who had lived among them, unnoticed and unchallenged, for nearly half a century. For investigators, the arrest was not the end, but a critical turning point. They revisited old evidence with new clarity, aligning timelines and reconstructing movements. Details that once seemed insignificant now fit together with chilling precision. The case transformed from mystery to confirmation. Evan's reaction during processing revealed more than words ever could. His face carried the weight of realization that there would be no escape this time. The systems he believed incapable of reaching him had evolved, strengthened by patience and technology. The future, he assumed, was secure, vanished in a single afternoon. For Carla Walker's family, the arrest reopened wounds that never truly healed. Grief resurfaced alongside something After decades of unanswered questions, there was finally a person responsible. Someone who could no longer hide behind time. The town responded with a mixture of relief and disbelief. People replayed past interactions with Evan, searching their memories for signs they might have missed. Ordinary moments now felt unsettling. The idea that evil could remain concealed for so long forced everyone to confront uncomfortable truths about trust and appearance. As Evan was taken into custody, the weight of 46 years pressed down on him. The silence that once protected him now surrounded him in a different way. This time, it was not freedom, but inevitability. The case that once seemed destined to remain unsolved had reached a moment no one thought possible. Justice had stepped out of the shadows, not loudly or dramatically, but with quiet certainty. And as the doors closed behind Evan Hargreave, the long wait for accountability finally came to an end. The legal process that followed moved slowly but deliberately, shaped by the weight of history and the seriousness of the crime. Prosecutors understood that time itself would be a challenge. Memories had faded, witnesses had aged, and some were no longer alive, yet the case no longer depended on recollection alone. Science had replaced uncertainty with clarity, and the evidence spoke with a confidence that decades could not weaken. In court, the story of Carla Walker's final hours was reconstructed piece by piece. Old photographs were displayed, Maps were revisited, and records long forgotten were brought back into focus. What once seemed like scattered fragments now formed a clear and disturbing narrative. The gap between the young woman Carla had been and the life Evan Hargreave had quietly lived for decades felt impossible to ignore. Ruth Walker attended every proceeding. Age had slowed her body, but not her resolve. For 46 years, she had lived without answers, carrying grief that never softened with time. Sitting in the courtroom, she watched the system finally do what it could not do in 1979. The wait had been unbearable. But the truth, when it arrived, brought a sense of finality she had never thought she would experience. The defense attempted to lean on the passage of time, suggesting doubt where none truly existed. But the forensic evidence was precise, supported by careful documentation and verified repeatedly. The jury listened as experts explained how the smallest preserved detail had survived decades, waiting for technology to catch up. The idea that justice could be delayed but not erased became impossible to dismiss. When the verdict was delivered, there was no shock. The room absorbed the outcome in silence. Evan Hargreave was found guilty of Carla Walker's murder. The man who believed he had escaped accountability had reached the end of his carefully protected path. His expression reflected not anger or surprise, but the understanding that the future he built on secrecy was over. The sentence ensured that Evan would never experience freedom again. The years he spent avoiding consequences could not be undone, but they could no longer continue. The court acknowledged the cruelty of a life taken and a family left waiting for answers for nearly half a century. The punishment could not restore what was lost, but it marked a line between the past and what remained of the future. Outside the courtroom, the town reflected on what the case revealed. People spoke about how easily trust can be misplaced and how ordinary appearances can hide unimaginable acts. Carla Walker's name was no longer attached to an unsolved mystery, but to a truth finally revealed. Her story became a reminder that time does not protect those who commit violence. It only delays their reckoning. The case closed officially, but its impact lingered. It changed how cold cases were viewed, proving that patience and persistence could overcome even the longest silence. Investigators who worked the case felt a quiet sense of completion, knowing that justice, though late, had arrived. Carla Walker was remembered not only as a victim, but as the reason a killer was finally exposed. Her life mattered enough to wait 46 years for answers. And in the end, when the door finally closed behind Evan Hargreave, it was not just the conclusion of a case, but the fulfillment of a promise time could not erase.